How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Your friends, we're getting close to 100. This is great. Wow. BavaMetzia. Has BavaMetzia changed your life? So today's Daf, I kind of hope we could do it quickly. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Oh yeah, I hope it'll be a quick one. But let's see. I don't know. It's hard to tell. All right. But we've already done a whole bunch on Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph. So we are already about 15-20 lines into the Amud and Daf Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph. And we're also not going to get to the end of Tzadi Vav Amud Beis. So yeah, I hope it shouldn't be too long. Okay. So we're going to start on Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph, as I said, about 15-20 lines into the Amud by Boi Romi Bar Choma. Yeah, it's basically where we left off yesterday. Okay, by Ram Bar Choma asked the kasha, Shala l'riv'a mau. You hear that? If somebody borrows an ox with the intention to sodomize it, mau k'deshayle inche bo'ino nulachi lo shayle inche. Well, that's not normally how people. Why somebody would want to borrow an ox. O dilma taima mai mishmanoa vai nami is leano. Maybe the point of a borrowing is to get benefit, and I guess for this person there will be benefit. So that's the question. So meaning, is it considered a shoel with all of the halachis of shoel that come along with it, or not? I don't think we actually answer most of these questions. We're going to ask a whole bunch of questions like this. Well, not like that specifically, but like a whole bunch of like these maybe this, maybe that kind of questions. How do we view this? How do we view that kind of questions? Shalali rose bamal. What if you borrow an ox just so that you can look real fancy? I guess I feel like people don't necessarily appreciate that nowadays because people don't really appreciate how fancy an ox could be. I guess it would be the equivalent of like a fancy car, right? Right? If you borrow a car just so that you could look all fancy, you want to impress somebody. So I guess at a certain point you would borrow an ox. Hey, can I borrow that ox? Yeah, it's a nice looking ox. All the people are going to think I'm very fancy. Shala de rosba. So if you borrow an ox just so you could look real fancy, what's that? Mamona be'inon ve'ika. So is it about, you borrow something of value, and there's value here. You're looking all fancy. Or maybe you have to get benefit directly from the thing that you're borrowing itself, not from some kind of like Facebook meta kind of aspect, like looking all fancy because of it. What if you borrow an ox with the intention to do less than a pruta's worth of work? Now what? Well, is it just about any amount of money, of value, any amount of value, and there's some amount of value here, less than a pruta, but it's something. Or maybe less than a pruta doesn't count. What if you borrow two cows, and each one is going to do half a pruta for a total, though, of a pruta? Do we say, well, we go based on the lender and the borrower, and a pruta's worth is being lent and borrowed? Oh, Dilma, or perhaps zil basar paros v'chol chada v'chada lekamamona. Or do we say that we go based on the cows, and each individual cow is going to be responsible for less than a pruta's worth of value, so therefore it's irrelevant. Okay, now things start to get a little bit more detailed. Shal mishutfin v'nishalo echod mehen. So what if a borrower borrows from partners who jointly own a cow? So you have these partners who jointly own a cow, and they jointly lend their cow to a borrower, and then one of them is hired by the borrower. So now what? Right? If it was one lender who lent to a borrower and then worked for the borrower, so we said that the borrower would be potter in the case of onsin. But now there are two lenders who jointly own the cow. One of them is now working for the borrower. So what's halacha? Kulo bailav beino and ve'aleka. Do we say, no, in order for it to be considered bailav imo, you need the entirety of the owners, which would be both of them, which is not the case here. Or perhaps at least for that half, right? Meaning. So generally we say Ba'alef imo lo yishalim, right? So meaning if one person lent his cow to somebody and then was hired to work for that person, so it would be Ba'alef imo lo yishalim. The bar would be potter from paying. So do we say that if it's two people who own the cow and one of them goes to work, well then at least for that person's half of the cow, the borrower should be potter for paying for that half while still be chayiv for the other half. Shutfin sheshalu. What if you have partners who borrowed? Okay, so you have a lender, a singular lender who lends to a partnership, and then v'nishal le'echad man, and then that lender is hired by one of the partners. So now what? Kulo shoel ba'inon vileko. Do we need that the lender be hired by the entire borrowing party, where that is not the case here? Or perhaps ba'i palga deshaile mios mipater, or perhaps that would be interesting. Or perhaps ba'i palga deshaile mios mipater, or at least I guess vis-a-vis the half that he was responsible, he would be pater for. Okay. I don't think that we answer these questions unless maybe we end up answering them much later. Definitely, as this is Friday. I don't know if you know the way that I prepare Babylon Talmud, but basically the whole week I'm catching up until Friday afternoon when I get all caught up, which means that basically by the end, I haven't learned past this daf, is what I'm saying. So maybe if on tomorrow's daf the answer to these questions are there, then great. But I haven't seen an answer to them yet. Basically, you know how I work, right? Generally speaking, although recently it's been a little bit different, which is nice, but whatever. Basically, I get ahead on Shabbos, and then the whole week I'm basically catching up. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is that the last daf that I record on Friday afternoon is generally, I haven't prepared more than that yet. So, okay, let's go fight. Sometimes I do, but okay. Where are we? Now, we are getting to where am I? What? Okay, great. Okay, yeah. Now we are getting to some sugyas that are basically going to take us to the end of today's daf. Like this stuff is not going to be unanswered. Double negative. This stuff will have answers. Shoal me'isha. Okay, so shoal me'isha. So if a borrower borrows from a woman, okay, and she has a cow, and that cow is nichsei malug, which means that her husband has the rights to the peiros of the cow, to the milk, to work with it, whatever it is. Okay, so a borrower borrows a cow from a woman, vinishal baila, and then her husband is hired by the borrower, not her, but her husband is hired by the borrower, or isha shashoala, or a woman who borrowed a cow because she had fields, she had property that was nichsei malug, and she borrowed a cow to work that property. Vinishal leval, and then the lender was hired by her husband to work the field, or not necessarily, whatever. Hired by the husband, was hired by the husband. Fine. Mao. What's the halacha? Kinyan peres ki kinyan aguf dami? Olo. Do we say kinyan peres is ki kinyan aguf? Do we say, we've seen this before, do we say that the right that the husband has to the fruits of the nichsei malug is basically as though he owns the nichsei malug themselves? In which case, just like whatever implications she would have, he has. So kilu, when you borrow from her, and then he is. When you borrow from her and then he goes to work for you, so that's basically like she's going to work for you, right? Or do we say not? Right? That's the question. Okay, Olo, or not? Fine. She says, now we're going to see another case. So that was sort of the husband and wife case. Ha'omer l'shlucho. What if somebody says to his messenger, Tsevi shoel li im parasi, I want you to go and lend my cow, and then hire yourself out to the person who borrows it. Mau. So if the cow dies, would that be considered bailav imo? Right, Mau, bailav mamash mina v'leka. Do we need, in order for it to be considered bailav imo, for the owner of the cow himself to be the worker? Or do we say, of course we have the principle of shlucho shel adam kamo, so a person's messenger is like him, so shaliach is like him, and therefore his shaliach working the field is like him working there, and then if the animal dies, it would be considered bailav imo. So that's the shaila. So we had two cases just now that we want to know about. We want to know about the husband. Do we say kinyan peris ki kinyan aguf dami? And we have the situation of the shaliach of the messenger. Do we say shlucho shel adam kamoso or not vis-a-vis bailav imo? So Amli Rav Acha prayed to Rav Avya li Rav Ashi. Baal plukta to B'yechon v'Reish Lakish. That in terms of the question of the husband and the kinyan peres kinyan aguf dami, that's machlokes Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. Shliach in terms of shlucho shel adam k'moso plukta to Rabbi Yonasan v'Rabbi Yeshia. That's machlokes Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yeshia. Baal, when it comes to the husband and kinyan peres kinyan aguf dami, plukta to Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. The Itmar, as we said, amocher sadeh lachavero leperis. Oh, we've seen this before. So in Masechta Gittin, that if somebody sells his field to his friend, but he doesn't actually sell the field to his friends, he just sells the right to the peiris. Basically, you can use it for a certain amount of time. Sounds like basically like a rental of sorts, but whatever. We'll see more in Mamash a second. But basically, I don't know, Shimon sells his field to Ruvain, but he doesn't actually sell the field to Ruvain. Ruvain doesn't really own the field forever now, but he can use it, for all intents and purposes, it's his, but at a certain point it's going to go back to Shimon, but in the meantime, it's Ruvain's. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's a proper sale. Kinyan peres kinyan aguf dami. That the fact that Ruvain, has access to the field entirely and to its fruits and everything, so it's considered like he owns the field itself, and therefore the implication is that when he goes and he brings, I think bikurim, right? I believe it is bikurim. Bikurim. He could bring bikurim and he could say haaretz arami over avi that this is the land that you gave me, right? So while Reuven sort of quote unquote owns this land, he can harvest his bikurim and bring them to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash, and say the parsha of bikurim, Arami Ovid Avi, and Al Adama Asher Nasatali, right? The land that you gave me, it's considered his land, and he could say, the land that you gave me, this is my land, even though ultimately he only really owns the fruits, but kinyan peres ki kinyan aguf dami. Rish Lakish Omer maybe ve'enu kari. Whereas Rish Lakish says, yeah, you can bring the bikurim, but you can't say ha'adam asher nosato li. You can't say the land that you gave me, because he doesn't actually own the land, because ultimately he just owns the fruits, but not the land itself. That's Shimon still owns. Rabbi Yochanan maybe v'korei. Rabbi Yochanan says he could bring the bikurim and say ha'adam asher nosato li, because kinyan peres ki kinyan aguf dami, because owning the fruits is like owning the property itself. Rish Lakish Omer says Rish Lakish maybe ve'enu kari, he could bring the fruits, but he can't say Adama Asher Nasatali, because kinyan peres lav ki kinyan aguf dami, because owning the fruits is not like owning the property itself. Shliach. Okay, so we said that kinyan peres ki kinyan aguf dami is a machlokus of Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and we said shliach in terms of shluchos adam kamoso plukta to Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yeshia. The Tanya is learned the Brisa. Ha'omer the apotropis, if a person, you have a husband, and he's going away someplace, and he makes a apotropis, a representative, and he says, Kol nedarim shetei ishti noderes mikanat she'avo mimakom ploni, while I'm away, if my wife makes any nedarim, hafer law, I want you to be mefer the nedarim on my behalf. Behafer law, and then the apotropis was, he did that, he obliged, he was mefer her nedarim. Yachol Yehu Mufarin. So does that work? Can the apotropis in fact be made for her nedarim? Tamlomer isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu div Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia says no. The pasuk says that only her husband can do it, not his shaliach. Rabbi Yonasan Omer Matzinu b'chol makom sheshlucho shel adam kemoso. Whereas Rabbi Yonasan says no, shlucho shel adam kemoso. A person's messenger is like him, and just like he can be made for an nadarim, so can his messenger. And and therefore we would apply the same thing over here also by saying to the messenger that he should hire himself out to the borrower. Fine. Omer of Ilish l'Rava says of Ilish l'Rava. Omer le'avdo. If a person says to his eved, "Tzei v'yishoel im parasi," go and lend out my cow and hire yourself as well. Mao, what is the halacha in terms of would that be considered baal of imo or not? Tibar l'man damar shlucho shel adam kemoso, v'tibar l'man damar shlucho shel adam eino kemoso. And this question by an eved is relevant regardless of where you hold vis-a-vis shlucho shel adam kemoso. Tibar l'man damar shlucho shel adam kemoso, because even if you hold shlucho shel adam kemoso, hanemile shliach de bar mitzvahu. That's specifically by a shaliach, right? If I have a cow and I make a messenger to go lend out my cow and hire yourself, well, my messenger is somebody who can own property. An eved doesn't own property, and therefore an eved can't borrow something or lend something, but my messenger can. So if you say shlucho shel adam kemoso, maybe that's dafka by a shaliach, but maybe not by an eved. Aval eved la bar mitzvah, but an eved who's not chayav in the mitzvah, right? In this psukim and the mitzvahs around, meaning the concept of shoel, meaning the mitzvah in the Torah about shoel and shomrim. So therefore, lo. So even if you say shlucho shel adam kemoso, that wouldn't apply to an eved who doesn't own things and can't lend and things like that. Or perhaps, or even if you say that we don't say shluchot shel adam kemoso, but hanemine shaliach, that's just like a random person that I make into a messenger. Aval eved, yad eved kiad rabodami. But by an eved, I'll say that the hand of the eved is like the hand of the adon. So Amar Leg, so it says Rav mistabi yad eved kiad rabodamya. That mistama we would say yad eved kiad rabo, and it would be considered baal of imo lo yishalim. By Rami Bar Chama asks a question. Baal benichse ishto. A husband, with regard to his wife's nichse malug. So if she has like a cow, for example, she has a cow that she owns, it's hers, but he can use it, and he's using it. He's plowing the field with his wife's cow, and the cow drops dead. Shoel ave, do we say he's considered like a shoel, and therefore he's chayv ba'onsin? Or socher ave, or do we say he's like a renter who's potter for onsin? Rav says Rav lefum churfa shabeshta, that Rav Bar Chama was so sharp and he was thinking so quickly that he made him he was sloppy, because that makes no sense. Manafshach I shoel ave, even if he's a shoel and a shoel is chayv in onsin, but it's his wife's cow. So she'ela b'bailami, Mamela would be considered like he's borrowing it, but the owner is working with him. It's his wife. So therefore, he's going to be potter either way. If he's a shoyel, it's baal of imo. If he's a soicher, so he's potter for onsin anyways. Where am I? And if he's considered a renter, schirus b'bailami. Right, so it's schirus b'bailim. Okay. So either I guess that would even include like name of Aved. I guess whatever it is, whenever the bailim imo lo yishalim, right? Whenever the owner is there, he wouldn't have to pay. So what's the difference? Rather, Rambam Bar Chama's question is relevant. De agar mina para. What if he rented a cow from her? Okay, she had a cow. He rented her cow. And then he married her. So what's halacha? Do we say shoyel ave or socher ave? Is he now considered a borrower or a renter? Shoyel ave. Do we say that he's now considered a borrower? and now his new status as a borrower of the cow, now that they're married, and it's she'ela bebailim, and mafkoa schirus shelo bebailim, and that replaces his former status of being a renter prior to their marriage, and he was renting it and she was not working for him, and that is now replaced by his current she'ela bebailim status. Or perhaps do we say no, he just remains the same renter that he was before? To which we say, wait, well, this doesn't make sense. Why did we say that if we were going to consider him to be a shoel, then that would replace his prior status of a renter? Let's say the same thing, but if we treat the husband as a renter, it would still, let's say that the schirus, there's a difference between the original status of schirus when he was a renter and she wasn't working for him, versus now that if we consider him a renter once he's married, he would be a renter with her working for him, right? Meaning they're married now. It would be memelik schirus bebailim. So how come if we're saying that he's considered a shoel, the status of shoel she'ela bebailim would replace the original schirus shelo bebailim? Say the same thing if we consider him to be a socher, that the socher bebailim would replace the socher shelo bebailim, right? So socher nami, say the same thing if we would consider him to be a socher. Have a socher nami have teisi schirus bebailim. Tepuk schirus shelo bebailim. That let schirus bebailim replace his initial status of schirus shelo bebailim. So elaki kami baya l'Rami bar Chama. Rather, the Rami bar Chama's question is the agra ihi para me alma. Is an interesting question now. She borrowed a cow. No, she rented a cow. They were not married. She rented a cow from some random guy. So she's a renter from a rentor. V'hadar nazba. And now she gets married to a fine bacher. And the shaila is her new husband, what's his relationship to this rental cow? Is he considered like a borrower or a renter? Super interesting. However, this is a sugya from ages ago. About 2 months ago we had this sugya. That if somebody borrowed, right? I think we said Ruvain rents a cow from Shimon and then lends it out to Levi. Right? If the renter then lends it to somebody else to borrow it. So there was a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi. This was ages ago. That the Chachamim say, well, the renter, right? So if the cow drops dead, well, the renter vis-a-vis the rentor, well, the renter is pater for onsen, so he doesn't have to pay the rentor anything. But in terms of the renter lending it to a borrower is chayiv for onsen, so the borrower has to pay the renter. Right? So the renter is renting it from a rentor, he's pater for onsen, but the borrower from the renter has to pay the renter. So now, in this case, she is the renter. She rented the cow from a rentor. Her husband is potentially now a borrower, which means if the cow drops dead, well, in terms of whatever. So one second. So that was the Chacham's opinion, right? That the borrower would have to pay the renter, and the renter is pater to the rentor. Rabbi Yossi's opinion, however, was that no, the borrower would have to pay the rentor. Okay? It's not that the borrower pays the renter and the renter doesn't have to pay the rentor or anything. No, the borrower, right? Meaning the renter rented a cow from a rentor and then lent it out to a borrower. And then the animal dropped dead. So the borrower needs to pay the rentor. So again, Eliki Kami Baya, L'Rami bar Chama's question is, Kigon de Agra I Para Me Alma. She had rented a cow from a rentor. The Hadar Nasva, and then she got married to a bacher. The Aliba de Rabbanon, so according to the rabbis, the Amri Shoel Mishalim the Socher, according to the rabbis who say that in this setup, the borrower would pay the renter, and the renter, meaning the animal dropped dead, so the borrower is chai for onsim, he would have to pay the renter. The renter, however, is pater for onsim, so he would not have to pay anything to the rentor. Well, loti barilach, well, then certainly there's no question in this case. Divade she'ela bebailim he. Well, it's she'ela bebailim, right? He's borrowing, meaning if he's considered a borrower, well, then so in this case, she's pater from having to pay the rentor because it dropped dead. As a renter, she's pater from onsin. In terms of him, he's she'ela bebailim, so he doesn't have to pay her. Kiti barilach, the question is aliba de Rabbi Yossi. But according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that the borrower has to pay the rentor, the Amar Tavza, part of the Bailim, who says that the cow needs to be returned to the rentor, the Bailim Arishonim. What's the halacha? So do we say shoyel have? Do we say he's considered a borrower, in which case he has to pay the rentor? Osocha have? Or do we say that he's a renter, and if he's a renter, then he's pater for onsin? So Amar Rava Baal lo shoyel have v'lo socher have elokeach have. Rava says, wait, people. A husband, vis-a-vis his wife's nichsei malug, is neither a shoel nor a socher. He's a purchaser. He's considered somebody who has purchased it from his wife. Midrab Yossi Rab Chanina, as we've seen before, from Rab Yossi Rab Chanina, be'usha eskinu. Remember takonas usha, that they established in usha, that they enacted in usha, that if a woman sells her nichsei malug to a third party while her husband is alive, and then she dies, and she dies, and now the husband inherits her, the husband can go to the buyer who purchased the nichsei malug from the wife when she was alive. The husband can now go to her and say, hey, I purchased it first, because he's considered like a lokeach. So he's like, hey, I purchased it first, you have to give it to me, you can take it away from the lokeach. So says Rava, a husband vis-a-vis his wife's nichsei malug is neither a shoel nor a socher, he is a lokeach. If you have a husband and wife, and then his wife's father passes away, and she inherits him, and as part of the inheritance, there's money that is hektish. And Memela, he has the right to use, these, at least the payers. So he has the right to use the money. Which means that Memela, this money of hektish is immediately like being transferred to him, which is kilu being like motzi them techulin, or using them in a not allowed way. So that should be considered me'ila. So by Ram Bacham asks a question, Baal b'nichsa ishto, so a husband vis-a-vis his wife's inheritance, mi ma'al, would he be mo'il? Would that be me'ila? Because this money if there's money of hektish, and that money of hektish is immediately being sort of made available to him to use, well then that's like being, using the money of hektish in a not allowed way. Rava man limol. Rava says, wait, but who would be the one who would actually be over on me'ila here? Limol Baal. What, the husband? Look, I mean, he's only interested in getting access to mutter money, not usr money. Timul'i, what, should she be the one who would be over on me'ila? Because it's like she's in a certain sense like facilitating this transfer. Well, if it were up to her, the husband, may not get any access to it to begin with. So why should she be mo'il? Nimalu Bezdin, maybe Bezdin who made this enactment that the husband would have access to these funds. Maybe they're over on Me'ila. When the Rabbanan made this takono, when they said Ba'lokeach Habe, that the husband would be considered a lokeach with these with this property. That's only for mutter things, not for usher things. Rather says Rav Baal Ma'al L'chshayotzi. The Baal, the husband, would only be considered being over on Me'ila if he actually uses the money. Like if you are actually motzi ma'oz hektish techulin, and that if you use money of hektish for chulin purposes. All right. Well, that was daf tzadi vav, Masechta BavaMetzia. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.